We sat down, well actually we were driving from the Oregon coast back home into Eugene, Oregon one day, and we wanted to write a Deep Space Nine novel. We had been asked to by Jean Ordover, and we were trying to think of what would happen on a space station, what kind of thing that people wouldn't already do. You know, we threw out the, oh, there are going to be terrorist attacks, and there's going to be this problem with the Cardassians, and there's going to be that, and we thought, oh, everybody's going to do that. What can we do? And I said, well, Dean, you know, if you had a space station like that, what would you do? And he said, well, if I were Quark, I would bring in everybody from all over the galaxy, all the best poker players, and have a huge poker tournament. And that was the genesis of the idea. That's what really made it go.
So why is everybody in the Star Trek universe a poker player?
I think Star Trek deals an awful lot with chance and the way that chance works. I mean, if you really step back and look at Star Trek episodes, the fact that the Enterprise shows up at all these crucial points in, you know, universal history is one of those things that is, gee, doesn't follow the laws of chance. So, but poker is a good example of the way that people think. In addition to the card playing, there's the bluffing that goes on. You know, it's a game in which you're supposed to lie, and we all know that in addition to just slapping the cards on the table, there's this mind game going on among all the players back and forth, and they're really trying to scope each other out. Now, if the players have different minds, different kinds of minds, you know, from a Vulcan to some race you've never heard of, then you just don't have the human interaction. You have the interaction of how do they think? Can they even bluff? Should they bluff? Mm-hmm. Can I get away with that?
Right. Thanks, Chris. Boy, it'd be hard to tell when a Tribble is bluffing. Another game featured in an SF novel is The Game of Life, not the Milton Bradley version, the one designed by Conway and Company in the 60s. My computer, Nancy, uses it as her screensaver. Pieces are strategically placed, white or black side up, on a huge checkerboard, and then are flipped according to simple rules that produce very complicated patterns. Life featured in David Brin's novel, Glory Season. Here, the planet Stratus is ruled by women, while the few men work as sailors and form an underclass maintained primarily for the purposes of breeding. Well, I guess that's what men do best. I mean, being sailors. Hi, David, it's the commander again. Why is the Game of Life so important to the men in your novel, Glory Season?
In Glory Season, the Game of Life serves a function as a semi-religious exercise for the men. They spend most of their year on ships, and they strongly suspect that they used to have a culture long ago. Well, the Game of Life has given them something that reflects this sort of metaphor obsession that sometimes men get into. We sometimes take our metaphors very, very seriously. We believe that the chess piece is alive. Women can play chess just as well as men, but they tend not to be obsessed.
What problems did you face in trying to make the game a mirror of Stratoan society?
Well, for one thing, no game can fully mirror a society. What games do is they shine a light on patches. Like in this case, it shines light on ecology from one point of view, and the Game of Life also shines light on people's passions for simulation, for metaphors, in another way.
When does the metaphor break down?
Any metaphor, if you try to, especially today's political metaphors, you try to apply it to real life, it's going to break down. And in fact, that's one of the points of the book. People who get too passionately involved in a game or in a specific political agenda, the answer to everybody, you should always say to such people, is get a life.
Kind of appropriate when you're talking about the Game of Life.
Yes. The pun is quite intended.
Thanks, David. Take care. Another SF author who's worked games into a number of her stories is Nancy Kress. In The Mountain to Muhammad, it's the ancient Chinese strategy game Go. And her story Touchdown features a sort of planetary version of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. Here, a giant computer sets players down somewhere on the devastated planet Earth. So playing on a grass surface is out of the question. More like disastroturf. Anyway, two players, Cassie and Maria, are awakened simultaneously inside of a tiny flyer, and each gets a half an hour at the controls to try and figure out where on earth they are. If it's doomsday, this must be Belgium.
What interested me in Touchdown is Cassie's evolving sense that this was once a living world, and that this is not the only living world that humanity is destroying. If it had just been Earth, we might have learned from it and moved on. But this is background events of the story make clear. We are perfectly willing to demolish other habitable biospheres as well and move on. And she comes to a point where this starts to be a little appalling to her. And instead, at the end, she leaves sport and joins a terraforming team. So what interested me was the evolution of her consciousness about this issue. And what also interested me was the complexities of her relationship with her ex-husband, who, when she becomes a star, is more interested in renewing their relationship before, and she sees that this is just as much of a throwaway kind of thing as the planets are, and rejects that as well. So the details of the game were thought up in order to let me show the evolution of the character, which is always what I care about.
Another author who has invented games in order to explore character is Iain Banks. All sorts of games cropped up in his debut novel, The Wasp Factory, but later, in The Player of Games, Iain focused on the game of Azad. How well a player does at Azad determines their place in society, kind of like with kids and Nintendo today.
Play is vitally important. If you watch any sort of animal, you've always seen stuff of, I don't know, polar bears or foxes or whatever playing outside the set or the den or whatever, or prides of lions and all that stuff. Play is vitally important. It's what helps to prepare you for the adult world. Now, because we're still animals in a sense, but we're intellectual animals, and we use games the way that other animals use just ordinary play. You know, they're cuffing each other around the head playfully and all that, with the claws in and all that sort of stuff. We obviously do use physical games as well. You know, little kids playing, you know, cowboys and Indians or soldiers or terrorists or whatever these days. But we also use the intellectual games, the games that only exist in the mind. Or that, okay, on a board or on a computer or whatever, but the action really goes on, not on the board, not in the computer. It really goes on in your mind. It's what you're identifying with. And games, I think, because they represent a sort of codification of life, if you like, because they're actually a simplification of life, because life is becoming more and more complicated all the time through technology. Games actually become more and more important because we need to have these things simplified for us to exist, to actually prepare ourselves as adolescents or whatever, as children, adolescents, and even in adulthood, for the rest of our adult life. And because adult life, because the world is changing around us, we're almost in a position that we're perpetual children. It used to be that once you're an adult, that was it. Society wasn't going to change around you. And now, in our time, it does. Society changes all the time.
Right. Can you explain a bit about how you designed the game of Azad for the Player of Games?
Well, the idea was, I thought, what would be the ultimate game? I was thinking about game complexity, and in a sense, the ultimate game is life. You know, that sort of nonsense. But I just thought, well, suppose you could make a game that was so close to life, but was still a codification of it, but in some way a distillation which included everything that was important and got rid of all the extraneous stuff, so it could still be played in some relevant time scale. Right. I just thought, well, that would be an ideal way of actually finding out who was going to be the best person to take places of power within that society. So it was just a simple, not say a coldly thought up thing, but it's a fairly intellectual exercise, if you like, thinking. I mean, it didn't just sort of come fully formed into my head. It was a gradual process of working out thinking how much more complicated could a game be, and then what would be the most complex game,
Perhaps the most complex games today are being played by science fiction and fantasy fans, role-playing games. Not surprisingly, a number of stories have gamers at the center of the action. The most famous of these has to be the Dream Park novels by Larry Niven and Stephen Barnes. Steve, in the Dream Park series, the games teach players valuable lessons about real life. Do you think that's true for most real role-playing games?